He claimed he was working late. I tracked his car to my mother's house. What I found inside destroyed everything I thought I knew. His voice was completely calm on the phone. That is the detail I keep returning to. Not what he said. Not what I saw on the screen in front of me. The specific quality of his voice, warm, unhurried, carrying the mild irritation of a man who is genuinely inconvenienced by a meeting that will not end. He said the boardroom was running late. He said the Hargreaves account was more complicated than expected. He said do not wait up. And while his voice was in my ear, I was looking at my phone screen. At the blue dot that represented his car. At the address the blue dot was sitting on. Not the office. Not a boardroom. Not anywhere on the route between our flat and the city center. My mother's driveway. 2:17 a.m., his car. Her house. His voice in my ear telling me he was somewhere else entirely. I did not say anything. I kept my voice the same texture it had been at the beginning of the call. I said of course. I said do not rush. I said I would leave something in the fridge. I put the phone down. I looked at the blue dot for a long time. My name is Zola. My husband told me he was working late. I tracked his car to my mother's driveway. And what I found when I walked through that front door at 2 a.m. was something that no GPS coordinate could have prepared me for. Some wounds change you. Some betrayals break you. And some people, quietly, deliberately, rise. This is a quiet storm story. I need to tell you about the weeks before the blue, because this story does not begin at 2:17 a.m. It begins much earlier. In the accumulation of small things that I had been explaining away for 11 weeks. My husband Darius and I had been married for 6 years. Together for 9. The marriage had been good in the specific, real way of something built carefully over time, not perfect, not without its difficult periods, but genuine. Built on the kind of trust that accumulates through years of consistent presence and honest communication. Something had shifted in the 11th week before 2:17 a.m. Not dramatically. Not in a way I could point to and say, there. That is where it changed. In the way that significant shifts always happen, gradually, in increments small enough that each one is explainable on its own and only alarming when you look at all of them together. He started working late. Not occasionally. 3-4 nights a week. The Hargreaves account, he said. A difficult client. A project at a critical phase. All of it plausible. All of it the kind of explanation a woman gives herself when she loves someone and wants to believe them. He started putting his phone face down on surfaces. He started coming home with the specific quality of someone who has been somewhere emotionally demanding and has composed themselves on the drive back. I noticed all of it. I said nothing. I started paying attention differently. The tracking app had been on both our phones for 3 years. Not from suspicion, from practicality. We had installed it after Darius's car broke down on a motorway at night and I had not known where he was for 40 minutes that had felt considerably longer. We had agreed it made sense. We had never discussed it again. He had forgotten it was there. I had not forgotten it was there. But I had not looked at it in 3 years because I had not needed to. On a Tuesday evening in the 11th week I opened it. Not because I had decided to check on him. Because he had called to say he was running late and something in the texture of his voice, something I could not name precisely but that my body registered before my mind did, made me open the app before I had consciously decided to. The blue dot was at his office. I closed the app. I made dinner. I ate alone. I watched something I cannot remember now. I went to bed. On the Thursday of the same week he called again. Running late. The Hargreaves account. I opened the app before he finished the sentence. The blue dot was at his office. I said of course. I said do not rush. On the following Tuesday he called at 9:47. Running late. The blue dot was not at his office. It was moving. Heading away from the city center. In the direction of the suburb where I had grown up. Where my mother still lived in the house where I had spent the first 18 years of my life. I watched the blue dot move for 11 minutes. Then it stopped. I typed the coordinates into the map. My mother's driveway. I want to tell you what I felt in the moment the address appeared on my screen. Not anger. Not the hot, immediate outrage that people expect when they describe this kind of discovery. Something colder than anger. The specific quality of a drop in temperature that happens when something you have been half knowing becomes fully known. I had been half knowing for 11 weeks. The full knowing arrived in the time it took the map to load. I sat with it for 23 minutes. Not moving. Not calling anyone. Not doing anything except sitting with what I now knew and deciding what I was going to do with it. I thought about calling my mother. Decided against it. If she knew I was watching the blue, she would find a way to move it before I understood what I was looking at. I thought about calling Darius. Decided against it for the same reason. I opened the app's history function. A feature I had never used. It showed the location history for the previous 30 days, every journey, every stop, every address where the car had been stationary for more than 15 minutes. I scrolled back through 30 days. His car had been at my mother's house 11 times in 30 days. 11 times. While he told me he was at the office. I called my closest friend Yemi from the bathroom with the door locked and the tap running. Not because anyone was in the flat to hear me. Because the running water was the only thing that felt like it was keeping me tethered to something ordinary while everything else was reorganizing itself around a new and permanent truth. Yemi answered on the second ring. She always answered on the second ring. I told her what I had found. Not emotionally, in the specific, ordered way I communicated things when I was managing something I could not afford to fall apart about yet. She was quiet throughout. Yemi had the gift of understanding when silence was more useful than words. When I finished she said one thing. Do not go tonight. Not yet. Not alone. Not without knowing more than you know right now. I asked why. Because you need to understand what you are walking into before you walk into it. Right now you know where he is. You do not know why. And the why is going to matter for everything that comes after. I sat on the bathroom floor with the tap still running. She was right. I did not go that night. I went back to the history function instead. And I started building the picture that the 30 days had been assembling without my knowledge. If this story is hitting something real for you right now, hit subscribe. I post every day and I do not want you to miss what comes next. The picture took 4 days to build completely. Not because the information was hard to find. Because I needed to be certain before I moved. Because the thing I was beginning to understand was so far outside what I had believed possible that I required the specific, accumulative weight of documented evidence before I could trust my own perception of it. The GPS history was the foundation. 11 visits in 30 days. Always late at night. Always on the evenings he had called to say he was running late. Always at my mother's house. Always between 90 minutes and 3 hours in duration. The phone records were the second layer. I had access to our shared account. I pulled the records for the previous 3 months. Darius and my mother spoke on the phone 14 times in the period I was reviewing. Before the 11 weeks they had spoken perhaps once a month at most, the brief, polite exchanges of a husband and a mother-in-law who liked each other adequately and had no particular reason for more. 14 calls in 3 months. Several of them over 30 minutes. The third layer came from a source I had not expected. Our neighbor in the house we shared, an older woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had lived beside us for 4 years and who had the specific quality of someone who sees everything from her front window and says nothing unless directly asked, knocked on my door on the Wednesday evening. She stood on the step with a container of food she said she had made too much of. She handed it over. Then she looked at me for a long moment. "There is something I think you should know." Her voice was careful. Considered. The voice of someone who has been deciding whether to say something for a long time and has finally made the decision. "Tell me. Your husband's car. I have seen it leaving late. Several times in the past weeks. I thought nothing of it at first. But last week I was coming back from my sister's very late and I saw him. He was on the phone in the car before he drove away. I should not have heard what he said. But I did." "What did he say?" She looked at the container in my hands rather than at my face. "He said she is not going to find out. We have been careful. Just a little longer. She is not going to find out." I thanked Mrs. Okafor. I took the food inside. I closed the door. I sat at the kitchen table and I added her account to the picture that was now almost complete. I need to tell you what I suspected before I tell you what I found. Because what I suspected and what I found were not the same thing, and the difference between them is the most important part of this story. I suspected an affair between my husband and my mother. The late nights, the phone calls, the secrecy, the overheard sentence, the combination pointed in one direction and I had been pointing in that direction for 4 days. I was wrong. Not about the betrayal. There was a betrayal. But its nature was different from what I had assumed and in some ways more complicated. I discovered this on the Thursday before the Saturday I walked through the front door. Yemi had a contact, a financial professional who owed her a favor and who was willing to run a discreet search on a specific matter. I gave her the details. The contact came back in 48 hours. What he found was not evidence of an affair. It was evidence of a financial arrangement. My mother had been the guarantor on a significant loan that Darius had taken out 18 months earlier. Not a small personal loan. A business loan. The kind that required collateral. The kind whose existence would have required a conversation between husband and wife before any signature was placed. No conversation had taken place. Because I had not known the loan existed. My mother had known for 18 months. She had been helping him conceal it for 18 months. And the reason they were meeting at 11 at night in the house I grew up in was that the loan was now in default. And the decisions being made in that kitchen, in my mother's kitchen where I had eaten breakfast for 18 years, were decisions about how to manage the collapse of something I had not known existed. Without telling me. I called Yemi. Not in the bathroom this time. At the kitchen table. With the tap off and the room quiet and the specific stillness of someone who has arrived at a complete picture and is now deciding what to do with it. I told her what the contact had found. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "This is not an affair." "No. This is worse in some ways." "Yes. He did not just lie to you about where he was. He took out a loan in your shared financial life, used your mother as collateral without your knowledge, defaulted on it and has been managing the fallout in secret for months." "Yes. And your mother chose him over you. She chose to protect his secret rather than tell her daughter." "Yes. What do you want to do?" I looked at the window. The street outside was ordinary. People walking. A car passing. The world continuing in its ordinary way while mine had reorganized itself completely around a new set of facts. I want to walk through that front door. I want both of them in the same room. And I want to put everything on the table where they cannot manage it separately. Yemi was quiet. Do you want me to come with you? No. This is mine to do. When? Tonight. He will be there tonight. He called an hour ago. Running late. She took a breath. Are you ready? I have been ready for 4 days. I drove to my mother's house at 2 a.m. Not impulsively, I had waited for the specific window when I knew both of them would be there. When Darius had called at 9:47 to say the meeting was running late, I had opened the app immediately. The blue dot was already moving. Already heading in the familiar direction. I watched it stop in the familiar place. I gave it 45 minutes. Then I drove. The streets were empty at that hour. The specific emptiness of a city that has gone to sleep and left only the people with reasons to be awake in the dark. I drove the route I had driven 1,000 times, the route from the flat to the house where I grew up, muscle memory, every turn automatic. I parked 1 street away. I sat in the car for 5 minutes. I thought about the last time I had walked through my mother's front door feeling safe. Feeling that the house behind it was the most certain place in my world. The place that had existed before everything else and that would exist after everything else, and that no amount of adult complexity could make into something other than home. That feeling was no longer available to me. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door. I had a key. I had always had a key. My mother had given it to me at 18 and had never asked for it back. I put the key in the lock. I turned it. I walked in. The kitchen light was on. The rest of the house was dark. Just the kitchen, the specific warm rectangle of light visible from the hallway, the sound of 2 voices that stopped the moment the front door opened. I walked down the hallway. I stood in the kitchen doorway. Darius was at the table. My mother was across from him. Between them were papers, documents, a folder, the visible evidence of the conversation they had been having about the thing I was not supposed to know about. They looked at me. Neither of them spoke for 4 seconds. Then Darius, and this is the moment I will carry longest, not what he said but the specific quality of what his face did before he said it, the fraction of a second calculation of whether there was still a version of this that could be managed. Zola. His voice was careful. This is not what it looks like. I looked at the papers on the table between them. Then I looked at my mother. Then I looked at him. I put my phone on the table. The GPS history was open on the screen. 11 visits. 11 dates. 11 late nights. All visible. All documented. All time-stamped. I sat down. Tell me what it is then. What followed was not a confrontation in the dramatic sense. No raised voices. No thrown objects. No accusations delivered in the register of someone who has been waiting to say them. What followed was an accounting. Long overdue. Conducted at a kitchen table at 2 a.m. with the specific quality of people who have run out of the ability to manage the situation and are now simply inside the truth of it. Darius talked for a long time. I let him. Not because I needed him to explain what I already knew, but because the talking was the beginning of the end of the concealment, and the ending of the concealment needed to happen fully before anything else could. The loan had been taken out 18 months ago. A business venture, a property investment he had believed in completely and that had collapsed within 6 months of the loan being drawn. The default had followed 3 months later. He had approached my mother because he needed a guarantor and because he had been too ashamed to tell me. My mother had agreed to help him. She had agreed because she believed she was protecting me from information that would cause me pain. That was what she said. I am looking at her face as she says it, and I understand that she believes this completely. She had decided, in the specific way that parents sometimes decide, that managing the information was the same as managing the harm. It was not the same. Darius. I keep my voice level. You took out a loan in our shared financial life without telling me. You used my mother as collateral without telling me. You defaulted on it without telling me. You have been meeting here for months making decisions about our money without telling me. His hands are flat on the table. Yes. And Mum. You knew for 18 months. You chose his secret over my right to know what was happening in my own marriage. She does not look away. I thought I was helping. You were helping him deceive me. The kitchen is very quiet. Neither of them argues. Because there is nothing to argue with. The GPS history is on the table. The loan documents are on the table. Mrs. Okafor's account is in my head. Everything is on the table now. And the truth, once it is fully on the table, does not require my anger to make it real. It simply is what it is. And what it is enough. I want to tell you what I discovered in the hours after the kitchen. Not about Darius and my mother. I had discovered everything I needed to know about them before I walked through the door. About myself. I had driven to that house at 2 a.m. knowing what I would find and not knowing how I would feel when I found it. Those are different things. You can know the facts and still not know what the facts will cost you when you are inside them rather than looking at them on a screen. What I found when I was inside them was something I had not expected. Clarity. Not the performed clarity of someone who has decided how they are supposed to respond. The genuine clarity of a person whose most important question has been answered. Not the question of what they were doing. The question of who I was dealing with. I had been dealing, for 6 years of marriage, with a man who chose management over honesty when honesty became expensive. Who looked at the cost of telling me the truth and decided the cost was too high and paid it in a different currency instead, the currency of concealment, of late nights, of a voice on the phone describing a boardroom that did not exist. I had been dealing, for my entire life, with a mother who loved me in the way that some parents love, completely but conditionally, with the specific condition that the love remained comfortable. That it did not require her to deliver information that complicated things. That it permitted her to decide what I needed to know rather than trusting me with the full truth. Both of them had decided I could not handle the truth. Both of them had been wrong. And sitting at that kitchen table at 3 a.m. with the GPS history on the screen and the loan documents on the table, I understood something that was going to shape everything that came after. I did not need either of them to protect me from the truth. I needed them to trust me with it. And they had chosen not to. I drove home as the sun came up. Not dramatically. Not in the performed composure of someone managing a scene. Simply, I had said what needed saying, I had heard what needed hearing, I had left the documents on the table where they could not be managed back into concealment, and I had driven home in the specific early morning light that exists only in the hour when the night has not quite finished and the day has not quite begun. Yemi called at 6:47. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting in the way she always listened to things that mattered. When I finished, she said, "What now?" I said I need 3 things. A financial advisor. A couples therapist. And a conversation with my mother that is completely separate from the conversation with Darius because they are 2 different betrayals and I will not allow them to be managed together the way they have been managed together for 18 months. She said, in that order? The financial advisor first. Because the loan is a practical problem and practical problems have practical solutions and I need to understand exactly what I am dealing with before I can make any decision about anything else. she said, and Darius? I looked out the window at the street coming alive in the early morning. Deliveries. A woman walking a dog. The ordinary world beginning its ordinary day. I do not know yet. I need the financial picture first. Then I need to understand whether what he did was a terrible decision made by a man who was afraid or something that tells me something more fundamental about who he is. She said, and your mother? That will take longer. She said, I know. She said, I am proud of you. I said, I am not sure proud is the right word. She said, it is. You drove there alone at 2 a.m. with a GPS history and you sat at that table and you did not perform anything. You simply told the truth and let it land. That takes something. I said, it takes knowing that the truth does not need your help to be true. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that is going in my notes. I almost laughed. Almost. The financial advisor was a woman named Dr. Sable who had been recommended by Mrs. Okafor of all people, the neighbor with the front window and the container of food and the overheard sentence. She came to the flat on a Wednesday morning with the specific business-like warmth of someone who understands that financial crisis and emotional crisis arrive together and has learned to address both without conflating them. She reviewed the loan documentation for 2 hours. She asked precise questions. I gave precise answers. She made notes in a way that suggested she was building something rather than recording something, building a picture, an architecture of options, a path through the specific territory of a defaulted loan with collateral attached to it. At the end of 2 hours she put her pen down. The situation is manageable. Her voice was direct. Not optimistic in the performed way of someone managing your anxiety. Simply accurate. The loan default is serious but not irreparable. The collateral, your mother's property, is at risk if no action is taken, but there are several options that preserve it while restructuring the debt. I asked which option was best. That depends on what you decide about the marriage. I looked at her. Because the cleanest financial solution involves both names on the restructured agreement. But if you are separating the financial resolution from the personal one, you need a different approach entirely. How long do I have to decide? 6 weeks before the lender initiates formal proceedings. 6 weeks. I thanked her. I showed her out. I stood in the hallway of the flat for a moment. 6 weeks to decide what I was deciding about a marriage while simultaneously deciding what I was deciding about a mother. I went back to the kitchen table. I opened my notebook. I started writing. Darius moved into the spare room. Not because I asked him to leave, I had not yet decided whether leaving was the right answer. But because the specific quality of the bed we had shared for 6 years was something neither of us could manage correctly in the immediate aftermath of the kitchen table conversation, and the spare room was the honest acknowledgement of that. He did not argue. That told me something. Not about guilt, guilt argues. About understanding. About the specific recognition of a man who knows that what he did was wrong in the complete way and that the consequences of it belong to him and cannot be managed into something more comfortable. He booked a therapist. Not a couples therapist, a personal one. He told me on the Thursday after the Wednesday with Dr. Sable. Not because I asked him to. Because he understood that what he had done was not simply a financial error. It was a pattern. A way of responding to difficulty that involved concealment rather than honesty, and that pattern needed work he had to do alone before any work we might do together could mean anything. I received that. Not as forgiveness. Not as the restoration of trust. As a single piece of evidence that was now in the file alongside the GPS history and the loan documents and Mrs. Okafor's overheard sentence and the 45-minute conversations with my mother and everything else that was going to take a long time to weigh. I added it to the file. I kept working. The conversation with my mother happened on a Sunday. Not at her house. At a cafe, neutral ground, the kind of public space that discourages the specific kind of managed performance that private spaces permit. I chose a corner table. I arrived first. I ordered tea I did not drink. She arrived 10 minutes late in the specific way she arrived when she had been preparing herself, composed, careful, carrying the expression of a woman who has decided how she is going to be in this conversation and has rehearsed it. I let her sit down. I let her order. I let the ordinary rituals of the beginning of a meeting complete themselves. Then, Mum. I need to ask you something and I need the honest answer. Not the answer you have prepared. The honest one. She looked at her cup. When he came to you 18 months ago and asked you to be the guarantor. When you agreed not to tell me. In that moment, did you believe you were helping me or did you believe you were helping him? A long silence. A silence long enough that I understood she was doing something genuine inside it. Not performing consideration. Actually considering. Actually locating the honest answer underneath the prepared one. Both. She said it quietly. I thought I was helping both of you. I thought if he could fix the problem without you knowing about it, you would both be better off. But you chose to tell him and not tell me. Yes. Why? She looked out the window. Because he asked me to. And because I thought you would be angry with him in a way that might damage things permanently. I thought I was protecting the marriage. You were protecting his version of the marriage. Not mine. She looked back at me. I know that now. Did you know it then? Her hands were very still around her cup. I think I knew it and I decided that what you did not know could not hurt you. Mum. It hurt me. The not knowing hurt me. The GPS history hurt me. Walking into your kitchen at 2 a.m. and finding out that the two people I trusted most had been making decisions about my life without me, that hurt me in a way that the loan itself never could have. Her eyes were wet. I know. I sat with those 2 words. The same 2 words Ray had said to Liu's in the drawer story. The same 2 words that arrive when someone has finally run out of the language required to make their choices sound like anything other than what they were. I know. I nodded. Then I said, I need time. Not forever. But time. And I need you to understand that the time is not punishment. It is the honest distance required between what happened and whatever comes next. She nodded. We finished our tea. We said goodbye in the car park with the specific careful quality of 2 people who love each other and have damaged something real and are both uncertain about what the repair looks like. I drove home. I sat in the car outside the flat for 10 minutes. Then I went inside and continued working. The 6 weeks produced 3 things. First, Dr. Sable restructured the loan. The new agreement was in my name as well as Darius's, a decision I had made not because I was committed to the marriage but because I was committed to my mother's property not being used as collateral for a debt I had not agreed to. My name on the agreement gave me the control I needed to manage the outcome regardless of what happened between Darius and me personally. Second, Darius attended 8 therapy sessions in 6 weeks. I know this not because he reported it to me as evidence but because his therapist, with his permission and at his instruction, sent a brief note confirming his attendance and engagement. He had asked for the note to be sent. That was his idea. Not mine. Third, I had 4 conversations with my mother. Each one shorter than the previous. Each one more honest than the one before. The honesty was not comfortable. It had the specific quality of 2 people removing one layer of management at a time and finding, underneath each layer, something rawer and more real than the managed version. By the 6th conversation something had shifted. Not repaired. Shifted. The way ground shifts after a significant event, not the same ground, but ground that is beginning to settle into a new and different stability. I want to tell you about the moment I decided. Not about the marriage. I had not decided about the marriage yet, and I want to be honest about that rather than presenting a neater timeline than the one that actually existed. The marriage decision took longer than 6 weeks, and it deserved to. The moment I decided something else. Something more fundamental. It was a Tuesday evening. I was at my desk. I had the GPS app open, not looking at the blue, which was at home in the spare room where it had been every evening for 6 weeks. Looking at the history function. I was thinking about the Tuesday evening 11 weeks before the 2 a.m. drive. The first time I had opened the app and the blue dot had been at the office, and I had closed the app and made dinner and gone to bed. I was thinking about what would have happened if I had kept closing the app. If I had kept choosing the explanation over the evidence. If I had kept telling myself that the things I was noticing were not what they appeared to be. I would have been living inside a version of my life that belonged to other people's decisions. Managed into a shape that served their comfort rather than my truth. The app was not the point. The point was that I had opened it. That I had looked at the blue dot and trusted what the blue dot told me over what the voice on the phone was telling me. That I had given weight to my own perception rather than dismantling it in favor of someone else's account. That decision, the decision to trust the evidence of my own eyes, my own instincts, my own documented record of what was actually happening, was the most important decision in the entire story. Not the drive at 2 a.m. Not the kitchen table. Not the conversation with my mother. The moment I opened the app and believed what it showed me. Darius asked if we could talk on a Sunday evening in the 7th week. Not a managed conversation. He had stopped managing his conversations with me somewhere around week 4 of the therapy. He sat across from me in the living room with the specific posture of someone who is not performing anything and is simply present in the difficulty of a thing they cannot make easier. I have been thinking about what I want to say for a long time. Not what to say. What I actually want. Not the version that sounds right. The honest one. I waited. I was afraid. That is the honest version. I was afraid of what you would think of me if I told you about the loan. Afraid you would see me as someone who had failed. And that fear was more powerful to me than the respect I owed you. I chose my own comfort over your right to know what was happening in our life. And I dressed that choice up as protection and asked your mother to dress it up the same way, and we both told ourselves we were doing the right thing. He stopped. He looked at his hands. I know I am not asking you to trust me again. I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to hear that I understand what I did and why I did it, and that the why does not make the what acceptable. I sat with that for a long time. Then, the why matters to me. Not as an excuse. As the information I need to understand whether what you did was a terrible decision made once from fear or a pattern I need to account for in how I live my life. Which do you think it is? He looked at me directly. That is what the therapy is for. I do not have the full answer yet. But I think it is closer to the first than the second. And I think the work I am doing will help me be certain. I nodded. I did not say anything else that evening. But I added that conversation to the file. Yemi came for dinner in the 8th week. She brought food and the specific quality of presence that had been her defining characteristic through the entire 11 weeks, present without pushing, attentive without performing attentiveness. We ate in the kitchen. Not the spare room conversation kitchen. The ordinary kitchen of a Tuesday evening with good food and the radio on low. She said, "How are you actually?" Not asking for the managed version. For the actual one. I am tired. Not the dramatic tired of someone who has been through a crisis. The ordinary tired of someone who has been thinking very carefully for 8 weeks and whose mind is ready for the careful thinking to produce a conclusion. Have you reached one? Almost. She waited. I said, I think the marriage is worth working on. Not because of the 6 weeks or the therapy or the Sunday conversation. Because I have spent 8 weeks looking at 9 years and asking myself honestly whether what I found under the loan and the concealment was someone I could not build anything real with, or someone who made a genuinely terrible decision from fear and has the capacity to understand why it was terrible and do differently. And I think it is the second. I am not certain. But I think it. She looked at me. And your mother? That is its own thing. I love her. I am angry with her. Both of those are true simultaneously, and I am learning to hold them at the same time without needing to resolve them into something simpler. Yemi nodded. That sounds like the most honest answer. It is the only kind I give now. Darius moved back into the bedroom in the 9th week. Not because everything was resolved, it was not. Not because the trust had been restored, it had not. Because the spare room had served its purpose, and continuing to use it as a structure would have been its own form of management. We were building something different from what we had before. Not the marriage that had existed before the GPS history and the kitchen table and the loan documents. That marriage had been built on a foundation that included his willingness to conceal and my willingness to not look too closely. Both of those things had to be different now. The marriage we were building required something we had not fully practiced before. Honesty that did not wait for a comfortable moment. I required him to tell me when something was difficult before it became a crisis. He required me to make clear that I could receive difficult information without it becoming a verdict on him as a person. Both of those things were work. We were doing the work. Not gracefully. Not without setbacks. In the specific, unglamorous way that genuine repair always happens, in increments, with difficulty, with the occasional evening where the difficulty was more visible than the progress. But doing it. My mother came to the flat for the first time in the 12th week. Not for a significant conversation. For dinner. Yemi was there. Darius was there. The table had the specific quality of people who know each other well and have been through something significant together and are now in the ordinary aftermath of it. My mother brought a dish she had made. She set it on the counter. She looked around the kitchen of the flat she had visited many times before, but that felt different now because the things that had happened in the intervening weeks had changed the quality of every space between us. She sat at the table. We ate. The conversation was not about any of the things that had happened. It was about Yemi's new job and a film Darius had seen and a neighborhood thing my mother had been involved in. The ordinary language of people who are not yet ready to speak the significant language but who are present enough to be in the same room. At one point she reached across and touched my hand briefly. I did not pull away. That was the whole moment. A hand touch across a kitchen table. 30 seconds. But it was genuine, and it was the first genuinely unrehearsed thing that had happened between us since the Sunday at the cafe, and I received it for what it was. The beginning of something. Not the restoration of what was. The beginning of something more honest. Mrs. Okafor came to the door on a Thursday evening. Not with food this time. With a small plant, something she had been growing in her windowsill and that she said had produced more than her windowsill could accommodate. She handed it over. She looked at me with the specific attention of someone who has been watching from a front window and has observed the 12 weeks without being asked for her observations. You are doing well. She said it simply. Not as a question. I am working on it. I wanted to tell you something. She looked at the plant rather than at me. When I told you what I heard that night. What he said on the phone? I was not certain I was doing the right thing. I said, "You were." She looked up. "How do you know?" "Because I needed the information. I needed someone to confirm that what I was seeing was real and not a product of my own anxiety. You gave me that. Whatever comes from it, the certainty was mine to have." She nodded slowly. "Your grandmother." She said it carefully. "Not my grandmother, but her own. I thought of her when I decided to knock on your door. She used to say that the truth is never unkind even when the telling of it is hard." I held the plant. "That is exactly right." She went back to her house. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I went inside and put the plant on the kitchen windowsill where the morning light would reach it. The loan was fully restructured by the end of the 3rd month. Dr. Sable oversaw the process with the thoroughness I had come to rely on. The new terms were manageable. My mother's property was removed from the collateral agreement and replaced with an asset in Darius's name. The monthly payments were higher than the original structure, but the risk was contained and the timeline was clear. My name was on the agreement. Not as a concession or a sacrifice. As the decision of a woman who understood that financial decisions made in her name required her presence in them, not management from outside, not protection from the information, not a version of the situation curated by someone who had decided she could not handle it. Her presence. Her name. Her choice. Dr. Sable called when the final documents were signed. "Everything is in order." Her voice had the specific quality of someone who finds genuine satisfaction in a problem correctly solved. "You handled this with exceptional clarity." I said, "I had good information." She said, "You gathered good information." "That is different." She was right. The information had always been available. The GPS app had been on the phone for 3 years. The loan documents existed. Mrs. Okafor had been watching from her window for months. What had changed was not the availability of the information. What had changed was my willingness to look at it directly. What would I say to the woman sitting on the bathroom floor with the tap running and the GPS history open on her phone? Do not close the app. I know that is the hardest instruction. I know that what the screen is showing you is something your whole body wants to not be true. I know that closing the app and going to bed and telling yourself there is an explanation is the easier option in every way except one. It is not the truth. And you deserve the truth. Not the version that has been curated for your comfort. Not the version that has been decided for you by people who love you and have decided that love means protecting you from information rather than trusting you with it. The truth. Whatever it is. However it arrives. I would say, open the history function. Look at 30 days. Build the picture completely before you move. Because moving with incomplete information is not caution. It is the kind of action that produces confrontations rather than accountings. And what you need is an accounting. I would say, find your Yemi. The person who answers on the second ring and says do not go tonight and means it not because she is protecting you from the truth but because she wants you to be ready for it when you arrive at it. I would say, the drive at 2 a.m. is not the most important moment in this story. The most important moment is the moment you opened the app and believed what it showed you. The moment you trusted your own perception over someone else's account of reality. Trust your perception. The blue dot does not lie. The GPS does not manage the information or decide what you are ready to know or protect you from the coordinates because it has decided they might be painful. It simply shows you where things are. And where things are is always the most useful place to start. My name is Zola. My husband told me he was working late. I tracked his car to my mother's driveway. I drove there at 2 a.m. and I walked through the front door I had a key to and I sat at the kitchen table and I put the phone on the table with the GPS history open and I said, Tell me what it is then. And they told me. And I was ready. Because I had spent 4 days building the picture before I walked through the door. And the picture, every coordinate, every timestamp, every late night, every phone call, every document, was already complete before either of them said a word. That is what preparation looks like. That is what it means to trust yourself. That is what quiet storm is. Not revenge. Not noise. Just a woman who understood, quietly and deliberately, what it truly costs to rise. Subscribe. Because there is another storm coming tomorrow.